Hello, you wonderful people. Welcome to part 3 of this epic Next.js tutorial with Strapi 5, where we are building a YouTube video summarize app, and this is part 3. If you haven't checked out the previous video, I'll make sure to put it as a pinned comment down below, but in the description, you will find the link to the article that I wrote that I'm using as notes to base this tutorial. And as always, you could find all the notes in this complimentary article that you're going to see in the description below, which has all the code snippets that you need to make this tutorial happen. But I'm also going to walk you along in the video, but instead of watching me type all the code, you'll be able to grab it from the snippets. And this is part 3, where we're going to focus on finishing up our homepage, including our top navigation and footer. So without any ado, let's jump into it. The first thing we're going to start with is creating an image component, because Next.js has Next image component that optimizes your images, but we also want to make it easier to allow us to use Strapi images regardless if you're working in a local environment or you might have your project deployed and maybe you're using a service like Cloudinary for your images. So we do have to add some logic to make sure that we're getting the correct path. So let's jump right into it and start by creating our Strapi image component. By the way, in the previous comment, someone gave me the suggestion to make sure that I provide the repo for you if you want to follow along. I'm hoping that you started the project from video 1 and you have your own repo, but if you want to compare your code with mine or just to have a place to get started, you could go to my GitHub, my name, yt/tutorial/next/summarize, and you could literally pull this code from this branch, part 3 start, meaning this is the starting point where we're starting from. I already have this on my computer, so we don't have to worry. And I created a new branch called part 3 working because I'm going to be working in this directory. At this point, you should have this basic hero section that it doesn't look as pretty as it will with the top navigation and the footer, which we'll add in a little bit. But first, let's jump into our blog post, and we're going to scroll to the bottom and we're going to copy the code for this Strapi image tx component. So go ahead and copy it. And here I am in VS Code. I'm going to go to my client folder, and inside source, inside components, custom, we're going to make a new file and we're going to call it strapi/image.tsx. And let's go ahead and paste the code. This is just a simple React component that is utilizing Next.js image component. And we are going to use this get Strapi media function that we're going to add to our utils folder. So in your project, navigate to lib, utils, and right after line 8, let's navigate to our notes here, and we're going to copy the code snippet here. I'm going to go ahead and paste it. And here we're basically doing simple check. If there's no URL, just return null. If URL starts with data or HTTP, it's probably hosted somewhere else. So let's go ahead and return a regular URL. But otherwise, if it doesn't meet any of these cases, that means that the files are living within our local project inside this uploads folder. So let's go ahead, get our Strapi URL, which is localhost 1337, and append that URL. Nice. I hope that makes sense. But now that we have our Strapi image component, let's go ahead and use it. We're going to go ahead in our client project, back to our hero section, and here we have our image. Let's replace it by Strapi image. And apparently I can't spell, so let me fix this Strapi image. That means I have to fix it here. Spelling is my weakness, but if you follow this channel, you already know. And back to our hero section, it's complaining because I don't know why VS Code complains. We just have to re-import again. So now everything works. And we could go ahead and remove our previous styles. Perfect. Now, going back to our application is going to complain because it's going to say, hey, localhost is not configured. So we need to do one more change here, which I'll show you. So before we showcase our image, let's navigate to our next.config.js file, and we're going to make the changes here. We're going to say images, remote patterns, is going to take an array of objects. Protocol is HTTP. and host name localhost, port 1337, path name uploads. Now with this change here, and now let's restart our front end and refresh. And boom, notice that our image is working and it's getting our correct path that we need from our Strapi application. This is a necessary step to make our image component more flexible depending where you store your images. But now that is done, we could continue. Taking a look here, right below our hero section, we're going to have our features item. It's going to be our feature section and it's going to have 3 features. And a feature is going to have an icon, a title, and text. So let's go ahead and see how we could represent this data in our Strapi application. So taking a look at UI, let's create a hero section component that's going to hold and represent our features data. So here in our Strapi application, I'm going to navigate to content type builder, and we're going to create a new component, and we're going to call it features section, and that's going to go into our layout. Let's click continue, and we're going to add a text field, which is going to be a title. So our section could have a title if we want to use it. Then we're going to click add another field. We're going to say text. It's going to be long text, and we're going to say description, just like that. And we're going to click finish, and let's click save. Now our feature section is going to have many features. So let's click on add another field. By the way, you could also create a new component here, but we could create a component by clicking add another field, selecting component, and we're going to create a new component, and it's going to be called feature. It's going to represent our data for our feature, which is going to have an icon, our heading, and subheading. So here in Strapi, we're creating a feature. We're going to add it to our elements layout, elements category, click configure the component, and we're going to call it features because we're going to have many features, and it's going to be a repeatable component. So now let's add our first field. Our first field is going to be an option of icons. So for that, we're going to choose enumeration. We're going to call it icon, and we're going to have 3 different icons for our check icon, for our clock icon, check icon, and cloud icon. Let's click add another field. Next is going to be text. We're going to call it heading, and that's going to stay short text. Let's click add another field, text. We're going to call it subheading, and that's going to be long text, and click finish. So now you could see our feature section has our title, description, and features, which is going to be an icon, heading, and subheading. So let's click save. Finally, what we want to do is go ahead and add this feature section to our homepage. So still in our content type builder, navigate to homepage, click add component in our blocks. We're going to say use existing component, and we're going to select our feature section and click finish and save. And before we query our data, let's go ahead to our content manager. Now inside our homepage, when we click add component to the block, we're going to see that we have our feature section. So let's go ahead and add some features. I'm going to call this feature section. Here are our features. And then we're going to add our features. First icon is going to be clock icon. I'm just going to say feature 1, and then some text. Let's add another entry. It's going to be our check icon. Feature 2, and you could add whatever things you want here, text here, but for now I'm just going to add random text, feature 3, some text, and now once all those items are added, go ahead, click publish. And in the previous video, just to double check, if you go to settings, user permission roles, under public, if you click on homepage, notice that we already gave our find permission, which will allow us to make a get request to our endpoint to get this data. If you haven't had this checked, go ahead and do so and click save. Now back inside our page.tsx file where we're querying our data. In the previous video, we talked about that we have to populate our components. So here you could see that we're already populating our layout. So now we're going to populate our features. So it's going to be layout.feature section. And if you're wondering where am I getting this, let's take a look at our Strapi application. So notice in our content type builder, we have a folder layout, which are feature section in there. And that's what we're referencing, our layout folder, our feature section. And inside our feature section, if we take a look at the component, we have our features block. And now we're going to say we want to populate. We could say fields to populate our title and description. And because we have our features, let's say that we want to populate our features, populate true to populate those items. So let's refresh. And taking a look at our response, we have our features section, we see our title, our description, and all of our items. Now that we know that we're getting our data, we could type our data based on this response. But before we do that, let's create our features section component. To make this part easier, so you don't have to type everything in the blog post under the section, build out our features section. We took a step approach where we first hard-coded everything, but if you scroll down, you're going to find the completed code snippet for our features component. So I'm going to go ahead and copy it. And inside VS Code, inside of components, custom, we're going to create a new file. We're going to call it feature section.tsx and go ahead, paste in the code. If we scroll up here, we have a function that is going to go ahead and get our icons based on the name. We have our interface. Our feature has ID, heading, subheading, and icon. And our features section prop has title, description. Our feature should be with an S. So go ahead and fix that in your code. And that's because, as always, I make typos. But if you take a look at our response, you could see that I called it features, so we want to make sure that we're referencing the correct item. Once we have our features, all we're doing is iterating through the features and rendering them to screen. So now inside our page component, we're going to go to page.tsx file. We're going to import our feature section. And here on the bottom, after the hero section, we're going to say feature section. We're going to pass the second item in the array, which is going to be our features. And we're going to refactor this to make it more dynamic. But for now, if we go back to our Next.js application and refresh, notice that we have our feature 1, feature 2, and feature 3. And what's awesome now, anyone from your content team in your Strapi application could go ahead and change features. For instance, on feature 3, I'm going to say, instead of some text, I'm going to say, you are all awesome, because I love saying that. Click published, back in our application, refresh, and boom, we see our updates. Nice. Now that we have our hero section and our features, let's take a look how we could make this a little bit more dynamic, because in Strapi, we might want to give someone ability to add more features, right? And so we want to make sure that we could dynamically handle that in the front end. And we're going to take a look how we could handle that by creating a component that will dynamically render our items based on the items in the response that it gets. For instance, if we get the hero section, let's match the hero section. If we get the feature section, let's match the feature section. So let's see how we're going to do that next. In a blog post example, you're going to find this component called block renderer. Let's copy the code and then we'll take a look in greater detail what we're doing here. Back in our page.tsx file, let's go ahead and import it right before our home function declaration. Our block renderer component has an object called block components where we define a key for the component name and which component we want to return. And we're going to use this as a lookup table when we're to get our component that we want to render. So here in our block renderer, we are checking the key in our block components and returning appropriate component based on our response. For instance, if we return our layout hero section, we're going to match our layout hero section component. And we're going to do the same thing with our features. If we return our feature in our response, we're going to match our layout.feature section and return the feature section. Now that we have our block renderer, let's implement it in the code below. So we're going to replace the old return statement here with our new statement to use our block renderer. So we're getting our blocks, we're mapping through them, and we're using our block renderer to choose the appropriate component based on the response. So if we take a look at UI, we know it works. What's awesome now, for whatever reason, if we wanted to add another section here, I'm going to say feature section, and I'm just going to do a bunch of random text because I'm going to delete this in a second. Clock icon, we just do a bunch of random stuff and click publish. If we go back to our homepage and refresh, notice that we have that new section being rendered. And what's cool, this allows you to dynamically create web pages based on the content in your Strapi application. But for now, we don't need to do that. I'm going to delete this, but this is the pattern that you could utilize. You could create Strapi components in a dynamic zone like we have here in blocks. And in your front-end application, you could define a block renderer with all your different components, and then you could dynamically render those components to your page based on your response. Nice. Now, before continuing, let's scroll to the top here, and we could see that we're calling our data inside our component. Let's make this a little bit more useful and extensible by moving this logic to a different file. Here in the source folder, let's create a new folder called data, and inside here, we're going to create a file we're going to call loaders.tsx. And in our blog post, you're going to find this function where we are defining our data fetcher that we're going to take a look at in just a second. But go ahead, copy this code, and let's paste it here above. And take a look at it. We are importing our QS library to be able to define our queries. We're using getStrapi_URL to get our base URL. If you take a look at libs, getStrapi_URL is responsible to checking, do we have an environmental variable? If not, just default to localhost here. Then we have our basic fetch data function, which in the future will take an auth response, but for now we're setting it as null. And we're going to set up a headers here. If there's auth token, we're going to add it to this header. If not, we're not going to do so. And then we're just making a basic call and returning our JSON. And you could make this fetch data function as complex as you like. We're just going to keep it simple this way for now. And now here below, we are able to create our loaders to be responsible for the data that they want to load. So for instance, let's create a loader for our homepage data, which is going to be similar to what we already done. So I'm going to say export. So let me scroll up here, and we're going to do export async function, and we're going to call it get homepage data. We're going to add our URL. Basically, we're using the URL class to construct a URL, which is going to take our path and our base URL, which will default to localhost 1337. Now we are able to add our search params using QS. And for this example, we already created this query. So let's go to our page.tsx file. So an app, page.tsx. Go ahead and copy this query, navigating back to our loaders.tsx file. Go ahead and paste it in. And now we are able to just return our fetch data function with the params. And what's cool now, we could easily create additional loaders in one place and import them into our page. So now that we have our get home page data, we could navigate back to our page.tsx file, and we could go ahead and nuke all of our old code, including this get Strapi data. And now let's import our get homepage data from our data.loaders folder. And finally, let's use it here to fetch our data. And I'm going to remove this console log because I think it's fine. Nice. And then if you want, you could do a little if statement, say if no blocks, return null, or you could return a message, no blocks found. But that's up to you. But basically, we are doing the same thing. The only difference is we are creating our loaders in a separate file to make it more manageable and importing them into our project. Now, making sure that our project's running and we refresh, notice that we're still getting our data and our website is slowly starting to come together. Nice. Our website is coming along great. In the next video, we're going to take a look how to add our top navigation and our footer, because I don't want to make this video any longer than it is. But if you always have questions, you could leave them in the comments below and I will get to them. But if you want to chat with me live, I do hang out at Strapi's open office hours on their Discord channel, 12:30 p.m. CST time, Monday through Friday. So if you have any questions and you want to ask them in person, you could do it there as well. And I definitely want to get back to streaming on this channel, which I will as my life gets a little bit less busy, hopefully next week. But with that being said, thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next part of this series.